Sons of the Forest is the follow-up to the 2014 open-world horror survival game from Ed Knight Studios. Much like the first game, Sons just launched into early access only on PC for the price of $30 US. And also like the first game, updates are planned regularly and scheduled in advance. As of recording, the first update has went live. I will be covering all future updates, so if you want to subscribe, you'll see those in smaller individual update videos as we go along as well. Sons of the Forest isn't really as much of a sequel as much of a stepping off point, at least for the game right now. Unfortunately, it's equal steps back as much as it is steps forward as far as the current game state, so I gotta say, for better or for worse, the baseline is that if you were a fan of the first game, you'll probably be a fan of this game too, even if that's not right now. There's plenty of new stuff to like with this game, but you may want to wait. So that's the TLDR for this video. But being a huge fan of the game, and given the unfinished nature of this product, I think it's going to be best to structure this video a little differently than how I normally do my reviews. I'll give some of the good mixed with some of the bad, and then when it's fitting, I'll also kind of add in what I would like to see changed or added and implemented in future updates. So starting off with what I think works actually quite well is the visuals, and that's honestly probably the easiest part of this game to complement personally. Whether it be lone sediment textures on the beach, foliage with the bushes, leaves and trees throughout the world, or even close-up looks at some of the mutant enemies that you'll find in the game, there is so much detail in all of these in-game assets. Photogrammetry tech seems to be the main push for quality here, as some of the rock textures like the, is it stalagmites? Is that the ones that's coming up? Or I guess there's probably both in the game. They look really good, as well as a lot of the cliff textures outside, and the tree bark specifically is a standout for feeling specifically very lifelike. Combine this with the satisfying voxel destruction as you chop down trees, and those even have the partially simulated physics where the tree falls down before it busts down into logs, and you have a really great attention to detail here that unfortunately does get a little undermined with some really bad standout textures like the gore jars or, quite frankly, any normal looking human NPC within the game. And I'm going to go ahead and throw this in here now that I didn't have this in my script, but the water doesn't always look amazing. But then you get things like the swimming pools and the bunkers underground, and the shimmer effects on that are so realistic, it just looks amazing. So I don't know. But really, comparing the human characters to the rest of the game, look at this opening scene here that I'm playing in the background, and then look at this. So with that being said, as you survive on the island, you'll quickly realize that about every 5 days or so, the season will change. First, you're in the game in the summer, but then that quickly turns to fall, and then winter, and then of course back to spring. I love the changes that come with each of these seasons, like the berry bushes losing their leaves, or the leaves on the trees turning orange and actually you can see them falling and filling up the ground space, and making piles for ambushes from some of the muddy cannibals later. Or even, one of my other favorites for the audio standpoint is the crunchy snow that you can leave a nice trail around as you're begrudgingly exploring in the winter. Unfortunately, these moments aren't really enough to distract you from how quickly enforced these season changes are. Personally, I believe that the longer we spend with these seasons, even if it's something like 10 days, doubling the time, as much as it would be annoying to have to survive in the winter for that long, it would actually make it like survival. My time in the winter, I found myself sticking a lot closer to my base or being in the caves exploring. The cold wasn't affecting me as much, I had food. Honestly, if they prolonged that, I wouldn't want to stay in caves those whole times, but maybe I would hunker down and have to defend my fort. Another thing that I would like to see is a little more nuance with these changes. Perhaps a light snow before the onset of the whole island getting covered overnight. But another thing is the passing of time also guarantees tougher challenges thrown at the player. Larger raiding parties, mutants above ground, and even cannibals wearing armor are all perfectly good reasons to build up an actually defendable base. Now, the map itself for Sons of the Forest is huge. I truly noticed this when I left my small area of comfort to continue the main questline on my first playthrough, and heading over to the other side of the island, I constantly found myself realigning with where my home actually was. I would always look back to kind of get a little bit of perspective. And that's when I realized that this game is vast. I had been traveling for, I don't know, 20, maybe 30 minutes. I was kind of getting distracted here or there, but I would look back and it felt like I was just on the other side of a cliff face. And it truly was an amazing moment that I'm not going to forget anytime soon. Unfortunately, what is forgettable is most of the actual minute-to-minute of the map. As I said, I got lost while hunting or exploring, but I never found anything other than a few animals. Across the actual map itself, there are a few different biomes with such a handcrafted feel that it feels nice to explore at first, but quickly you realize that you aren't getting anything different for exploring it. You're going to get the same sticks out of the trees, and quite frankly, most of the area, there isn't much to find as far as like human survivors or things like that where they would have left loot. No amount of cannibals or mutants across the world can distract that really there aren't that many animals to hunt, or more importantly, be hunted by. There are birds, squirrels, rabbits, deer, and moose, sure, but personally on land, I never felt unsafe. A wild boar that could charge you, a pack of wolves in the mountains, or hell, even a bear in a shallow cave would do wonders for variety's sake here. I mean, the first game even had snakes and crocodiles, so at the bare minimum, I would have hopefully expected them to return to the island. Even though I'm pretty sure this is a different island, but not that you would know from this game, you would only assume that from the end of the first game. Otherwise, I do believe that the island is in serious need of new points of interest. As I said earlier, exploring isn't always fun. You see really unique landscapes, and you could honestly think about building a base in these locations, but sometimes it's just inconvenient. And those inconvenient spots, I would love to see, I don't know, more human survivor camps or more vast and grand cannibal encampments, anything. Pretty much anything that's not just going to feed into the main quest and aren't necessarily just cave openings either. But that takes me right into the actual caves themselves. I feel like that's a good place to kind of go. So as I think about the franchise, what are the two most important things? Cannibals above ground attacking you, but also the mutated enemies below the surface, along with exploring their kind of creepy dwellings. To me, this spelunking experience in Sons of the Forest is severely neutered compared to the first game. Enemy variety is fine, I suppose. I mean, there's a few missing from the first game, but then there's things like the little baby bombers that return alongside some other Descent-type hostiles. And as pretty as these environments are, and the sound design works really well with echoes and things like that, there's still much less need for specific gear to make it through these caves. The first game had the rock climbing axe for you to move around the walls, and you would need to use the rebreather much more often. In this game, we have the grapple gun, which I believe is required once throughout the entire time. You will need a shovel to kind of get through some of the bunkers, and then once again, of course, is returning from the first game, the rebreather, which I gotta say, even in the main story, we only use it once or twice, and it's mostly for the light underwater to see where we're going rather than even having to hold our breath. And as much as the water underneath doesn't show any depth, neither do these caves. The caves mostly have vertical traversal, meaning that we're not really going down a rope or going that much deeper down at any given one point. Sure, there's slopes, we're going to walk down a hill, don't attack me for that. But overall, the experience comes off as pretty shallow. Ultimately, I could handle these toned-down caves if it were to put a more favor of fun and immersive combat encounters. Unfortunately, poor enemy pathing and AI in these caves leads to exploitive efforts to make them kind of drown themselves or get stuck chasing you in the cave interiors. And it's pretty much a big letdown when they throw a big room of enemies at you and you can kind of still just kite them and do what you're always going to do. All of that being said, though, there really is something to the fact that when you're down in the caves and your resources are limited, that the risk of continuing and finding new equipment before you either decide to, hop on back and leave or save your game is really, really enjoyable. There is a fear to that, and you never know what's going to be around any of the corners. That is until you die and have to retread your steps, then the caves feel absolutely abysmal to have to go back through. We've talked about the world and the enemies just enough. Let's actually strip that back a bit and just talk about the combat and general gameplay for a second. First off, I love the inventory system, I always have. Hitting I will see your whole pack and you'll see everything neatly laid out on the mat in front of you. And there you can browse your entire stash or even do some crafting. The crafting has individual animations for each of the items, and I absolutely love this. And of course, some of them are playing in the background right now, but between the care put into each of these items crafting and the musical stinger that plays along with it, that ties into the main theme at that, it's honestly one of the best moments of the entire game for me, and it happens throughout the whole time. Another nice addition is that you can hold I to kind of pull up the backpack, which acts more as like a favorites menu than anything, or like a hotbar, a quick little thing, where you can quickly access items like weapons, food, healing, to presumably not mess with the flow of combat or exploration. And I really like this. especially considering in multiplayer that the inventory screen is not going to pause your game. Oh, and another thing, I don't really know where else to put this in the video, but this game features some of the same issues from the first game, where if you load into a save or wait a while in the world and return to a cave, the loot from crates and caves will restock and basically trivialize the needing of a base to ever actually survive. I really do hate this, and I think it does need to be removed. If it's a feature for accessibility, I don't like that either. Maybe if there's like an easy mode, which there's a normal, hard, and peaceful mode, but I don't think in normal gameplay it should be here either. Now, when it comes to combat, things are actually quite varied. A myriad of weapons remain at your disposal, from different axes and other melee weapons that all have different attack speeds, damages, or even block efficiencies. Of course, the bow makes a return in this game with a few different ammo types, but this time around we see the other silent projectile caster in the form of the crossbow. The emphasis on range doesn't end there though, as we've also got thrown consumables like Molotovs, grenades, or even time bombs that are all effective at clearing out groups of the mutants. Finally though, we also have the guns, which even in the trailers are a heavier emphasis in this game. There's a few iterations, but you'll eventually find yourself with a handgun, a taser, and a shotgun. These weapons, along with the crossbow, feel like they have a great impact on the enemies. This is especially noticeable when you hit an enemy in the leg with a bolt and they collapse to the ground in pain, clutching their leg. Or another instance of impact is when an enemy just basically becomes a pile of meat with a shotgun blast. There are attachments for these weapons that you can find throughout your exploration of the main story, like the laser sights or the flashlight equipped to the gun, but I found both of these items to be underwhelming with usefulness and quality. And honestly, the only purpose they truly served was to obstruct my vision as I tried to aim. The best use I could find was putting the laser sight on the shotgun and just, shooting from the hip at all times. Now, when it comes to the actual combat though, and I really believe that the melee feels the best that it's ever felt for the series. The blocking gets the job done as always, and your swings feel weighty. The crafted and, grafted armors you can wear all feel essential in melee combat to work well as a cushion against even the heaviest of blows. Personally, I'd love to see a side dash or a quick step to evade easy damage for risk and reward, but maybe that's just me. The only thing I truly miss is proper melee weapon modification, like from the first game. I hope that this customization can return for some epic fights just like from the first game. Sometimes though, it's not the fight that matters, but rather what we're fighting for. For some, that may be to defend their elegantly crafted base. For others, it could be the girl Virginia, who we can meet on the island, or if you're me, it's Kelvin, the not-so-smart AI companion who no longer cuts down your tree houses, but still may just be a menace to society. Seriously though, between these two potential AI companions, you have someone to help you defend, and also someone to help you build and collect resources for your base. These characters feel essential in breaking up the monotony of single-player gameplay, and it really adds to the experience when they work as intended. Unfortunately, they never feel quite right. Before, I previously mentioned poor enemy AI in the caves. I believe that enemies above ground are menacing and creepy in all of the right ways. Lurking in bushes, under piles of leaves for ambushes, and even in the trees, groups of cannibals from different tribes may attack you. There are, of course, means of intimidation, or even showing of, revealing your identity with the mask, but ultimately my only real complaint with these enemies above ground is that their grunt sounds and the sounds that they're making as they're coming at you are a little bit repetitive, and then there's also the kind of occasional clip of the floaty animations when they're climbing trees, or moving around the environments as they're kind of sticking into rocks. Honestly, that's the biggest immersion-breaking thing when it comes to the cannibals above ground. Now, sticking with the sound design in the game, it's really hit or miss all throughout. Caves echo so realistically that it truly makes the game feel like horror, but then you realize that the same man moans that you get scared by in the early game are the exact same clips that you hear for hours and hours on end, and it does wear you down after a while, and you really have no mercy for these creatures. There's really just not a lot of variety to me, and that's a damn shame, especially when the sound effects do come off as good. When you're chopping down a tree, you've got a nice weighty sound to that, of course, or when the tree cracks and crumbles as it falls. Yes, some of these sounds do sound really good. The music, on the other hand, is a highlight of the game for me, as certain tracks play throughout the story progression, and mainly the little stingers that play when you craft items in your inventory. And that really does add to the memorability of the game overall. Another issue I have is that there is very little dialogue in this game, and I think this is more of a story complaint, but I don't feel that most of it's implemented. The only true cutscene was completely spoiled in one of the game's trailers. And there you have it, that's most of the dialogue in the game. But finally, let's get to the base building of the game, and it's kind of bittersweet. I've kind of been talking about it a bit throughout the game, but the base building is what you make of it. On one hand, you don't need it to survive in the game in its current state, due to refreshing supplies throughout the world and just the simple fact that you're going to throw up a little tent to save from time to time, but that's really about it. Now, when it comes to the actual crafting itself and wanting to make a base, the game feels pretty good. On one hand, I love the more hands-on approach to building with small items like campfires and, other things that you can place in the world without needing to, make the ghost projection kind of blueprint. This is a nice change from the first game, and I really enjoy it. And also talking about the ghost blueprints where it kind of shows the item that you're building up to as you put resources into it, I really like this as well. It's a nice visualizer of what we're creating and where it's going to be, and also satisfying to fill out and finish. And as nice as it is to build all of these things, unfortunately I can't help but feel that the game features far less as far as options when you're building bases for even locations, defenses, and decorations. Now, I will say that I do believe that these will flesh out in time with updates, but for now that remains to be seen, as the game features seemingly less than the original game, with a few new items but not enough to cancel out some of the classics from the first game. Where is the houseboat? And ultimately, yeah, it's just sad that the game has less than the original game ended with. I really did think that that would be the bare minimum. But speaking of having less than what's required, let's finally tackle the story. Oh wait, there's hardly a story to tackle. Don't buy this game expecting to have a satisfying story and outcome for a first playthrough. At least not right now. While the first game sprinkled environmental storytelling throughout the caves and even the overworld for you to find and interpret, Sons of the Forest throws most of that aside for a few newspaper articles and a few email chains printed out for some golf ball comedy. There is a skeleton of a story here, but there are so many plot holes at this point that we just don't know anything. As for the actual story gameplay, I like it. You need to find items like the shovel or the rebreather or the zipline to progress. I wish more items were needed for progression, and even that the ones that are needed more, but for a baseline, I like that skeleton, as I mentioned, that is provided here. There are a few scripted fight sequences at some of the facilities that are really engaging, even like the one that was just added in the first game update. However, I must admit that the final run in the final dungeon is so uninspired, and I really am going to spoil it just because, well, honestly, I think it's going to get changed for the final version. But it's basically just a giant cavern filled with of the strongest enemy in the game. If the layout wants to be kept, that they want to keep the large cavern or even the enemies, then maybe give us an AR and have a nice shooting gallery for the finale. Otherwise, there needs to be a change here, because you can run past all of them at once regardless. Once again though, I must admit that the cutscenes and small tidbits of story that we do have are really intriguing, but unfortunately it's just not there right now. I actually know that the first update added a new mini-boss encounter that I already mentioned, and some story pickups throughout the world. Now, I haven't played back through all of it to get to that point yet, so I'm not judging so much on this update at this time. But from here going forward, as I said, I will be giving updates on the game on my channel, and when it hits 1.0 release, I will do a re-review to kind of see what's changed and what's been added. But hopefully for right now, we can hope that End Night is on the fast track to creating a competent narrative that was in the first game. So with that being said, I feel I've covered every major talking point in the early access of Sons of the Forest. Bare bones aren't just a crafting ingredient here, it's actually a descriptor of the game itself. The story and base building are mere skeletons compared to the full experience of the first game. While each of those mechanics have insane potential, there just isn't everything I want yet. The AI works mostly well from companions to enemies, but more tweaking will make the experience more immersive and even less frustrating. Combat in the game feels better than it ever did, with a few odd quirks holding it back from greatness. However, I must say that what is great in the game is the style and personality. The world looks realistic in all seasons, even if the quick changes don't reflect that realism. The individual crafting animations all have wonderful music stingers that tie into the main theme, and most importantly, the enemies are creepy and threatening. With all that being said, I'd love to recommend Sons of the Forest, but unfortunately I don't feel that's best at this time. If I were the consumer and I hadn't bought the game, I would wait for more. There is a completely competent survival game here, and if that's all you want to do is survive and mess around with friends, then yeah, go ahead and pick up the game. It's a good price and it's probably cheaper now. But I definitely recommend waiting for a few more updates where they add new things to the game and potentially a more satisfying story, as that seems to be what they're going to be doing. I just would hate for anyone to get burnout on the game before it's actually ready to be fully enjoyed, because it deserves your full immersion and time. So with that being said, that's pretty much everything I have to say. I recommend the game, and I want to recommend the game fully, but for right now, it's not an issue of the cost. I think the cost of the game is fine. $30 will be fine. However, I think my issue is that I don't want anyone to buy the game and play the story once, get burnt out on the story, and then never have a chance to give the full experience the time and day that it deserves. So with that being said, let me know what you thought of the review and consider subscribing if you want to see these updates laid out in the future. And hopefully on a weekly cadence, I'll be putting out a new review for something next week. I'm not really entirely sure at the time of recording this what it will be yet, so consider subscribing. We just hit 1,000, and I really appreciate that. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.